Hello, yet again. Cathar Love 110. Today, 773 years ago, 16th of March, 1244, four or 5 hours ago, 220 approximately Cathars, their followers, soldiers, men-at-arms, mercenaries, their wives and girlfriends who decided to stay with the Cathars. They were all taken down from Montsegur, walked down barefoot around about just after dawn. It was cold, and they were herded down into a grove at the bottom of the Montsegur, and there, confronting them, apart from all the onlookers, the monks and priests as well, with their Te Deum, Te Deum, not God is great, for the greater glory of God, same thing. And there was a palisade, so a series of stakes in the ground, circular stakes in the ground, and in the centre of the palisade was all these logs, faggots, burning material. And the Cathars were assembled there, and there were knights on horseback, and they were herding them towards the palisade which they'd set alight. And the leader, the bishop of the bishop of the Cathars at the time was a gentleman, his name was Bertrand Marty, and the previous bishop, which was Guillaume de Castro, had died naturally, and Bertrand Marty had taken over. He was quite the opposite to Guillaume de Castro, who was a little bit, he was jolly and he wasn't fat, but he had that, he was slightly portly, whereas Bertrand Marty was more, he was a very serious person, and because he was the head of the Cathars on Montsegur, they gave him the privilege, I don't know whether you call it a privilege, but he was told to walk into the flames first, which he did. So in my mind's eye, I can picture the roaring of the flames, the smoke billowing, all the onlookers, the knights on horseback, men-at-arms, soldiers, the 200 Cathars waiting there for their turn, and that singular person walking into the flames, which he did, and no screams, and he was incinerated, of course. I was told, or I was asked by this person who was describing all this, it was the spirit medium, Susie, who'd never heard of Cathar. She said, well, we're talking about Catholics. She said, I've never heard of them. But she could see the scene. And she said, was my guide, Breda de Montsegur, was she a horse whisperer? And I said, a horse whisperer? Excuse me. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, the horses which held the knights were all agitated, because I'd imagine the flames and what's going on. The horses are not stupid. And she was there calming the horses and stopping them from trampling the Cathars who were waiting. So I find that quite amazing. But anyway, then it was the rest of them, and they were just simply herded into the opening and just herded into the flames, at which they went all voluntarily. And it's remarked, which I think also is amazing, that and this is from the what you call the enemy, I suppose, the Catholics and the people who chronicled it, and from the onlookers, and it's written down. I have the book, and it says that there was no screams, that they simply went into the flames and they were burnt, but there was no screams of pain or whatever. So this has happened before, and it's been mentioned a few times. Now, one thing that did happen, which I've never heard of, was that Susan said to me, you know, John, she said, there were children burnt as well. And I said, well, I've never heard of that. I said, I've never seen it written down anywhere. She said, no, they did. There were 3 young children who were children of the Cathars, and they were thrown into the flames. And so I didn't know. Anyway, this is subsequent to this, about 3 or 4 years later, and Susie, because there were such intervals in between my seeing her, at least normally about 2 to 3 years, she wouldn't remember what she told me the last time, or she certainly wouldn't remember the details. But I took some photographs of people that I knew, of my friends, who I thought possibly, because may have been Cathars, because we're very close, and there was one there, her name, and she said, oh, that's her, that woman there, she said, that woman, it was her children that were thrown into the flames. Oh, Jenny. Anyhow, I approached this person, and I said, have you any memories, any far memories? No, not a thing. No. So she said, the only thing I know about Cathars is what you've told me. But she had no feelings towards us at all, even when I told her so. And so it's around about noon now. So they'd all be enjoying a feast. That's all the soldiers, men-at-arms, the victors, priests and so forth, and it'd be having quite a big celebration, a job well done. And so the flames and now would be the cinders and the ashes are all dying down, and so I don't know what happened. Did they scatter the ashes later? I got no idea. That was their normal practice. So I was there. My present partner was there. My ex-wife was there. 1 or 2 others that I know. Jim Guillaume, who wrote the book, who had all the dialogues with Henri de Boers, the Cathar dialogues, they're written down there. So he was burnt there, and just an interesting aside, his guide, Henri de Boers, my friend Jim Callahan, or Guillaume de Mirepoix, he asked his guide Henri how often he was burnt. And he said, "No, I'm getting confused. Time is lapsing." It was my guide, and she asked me to ask Jim how often he was burnt. And So he asked his guide Henri how often he was burnt, and Henri said 3 times. He said once you were an Egyptian and you were burnt by the sun. The second time was at Montsegur. But what Breda is referring to is when he and I were burnt again as Cathars in Firenze, Florence, in Italy, which was about 100 years later. So I'm mentioning this in a roundabout way because Jim used to say to me that when he was a child he had these nightmares, and the nightmares were about being pushed into the flames and being burnt to death. So as a child he had these nightmares, and he remembered that, and he said he had that nightmare for years and years and years about being pushed into the flames and being burnt to death. And I met him, we were both in the Korean War, and I met him many, many years later, some 40 years after, and we became friends, and of course he's been dead now for about 9 years. So there's all these little interconnections, and some we don't find out what's really going on. Now, it was brought up to me that 773 years since the massacre, which is regarded as the Massacre of Montsegur, and there was a prophecy by Guillaume Belabast. He was the last Cathars Perfecti, last Cathar good person, bon homme, to be burnt. And he made the prophecy that 700 years the laurel will again grow green, meaning Catharism will once again be in full stride, will be on the world scene. And the thing is, when he was burnt, the last one was 1321. So there's actually 2070. There's 4 more years to go. So there is this resurgence, and I'm quite amazed at the amount of material that one sees on Google and different things about Cathars, Catharism, Cathar history, but the thing is, another point, that most of the people who tend to write about Catharism they may be, or they may believe that were previously Cathars, but they don't profess to be that in their book. They just are recounting the history and so forth. Well, in my case, I have no doubt that I was, and my friends, and we're here again, and from the letters and emails and comments that I get, there are Cathars that are in this particular area all over the world, which are coming back, and people who are just saying, I suddenly realise, sometimes they're not necessarily my video, but reading something else or reading a book, and there's this realisation because they've got these inner feelings, and suddenly it all clicks and they go, yes, I relate to that. So there is this amazing resurgence which is happening. Now, what did happen, and I have a copy here, and I think which is wonderful, is they're calling it the Great Pardon, and it's ordered or proclaimed or organised by Pope Francis, the present Pope, and he instructed the Bishop of Pamiers. It was the Bishop of Pamiers 700 years ago who had Guillaume de Belabas burnt at the stake, and he was asked to announce this pardon, which he did in the church at Montsegur. Now, it was obviously in French, so I've had someone translate it, a friend of mine, Janos, translate it into English. So my French is not that good, and also this is in English. We're talking in English, so I think it's best in English. And I'll just read it out, pardon me. Therefore, according to the framework of the Year of Mercy, willed by Pope Francis, the Bishop of Pamiers, Monsignor Jean-Marc Etienne, declared in the church at Montsegur on the 16th of October 2016. Nothing justifies the blood of a brother who does not believe like us. We Catholic believers who are in the Ariège, that's the French area, beg forgiveness, first of our Lord, but also to all those who as members of our church have been the persecutors. Today, we consider that secret agreements or conclusions that are being made between the temporal, political and spiritual powers, between the state and church, can no longer be a valid option for the life of the world, nor for its own path to the kingdom of God. Here, under the ashes, the once glowing coals are still warm, and the fire of the unjust treatment is not yet extinguished. So that was last year, 16th of October. So I think certainly a step in the right direction, and the plain fact is we need respect and tolerance for everybody. A quick aside, I heard this debate the other day, and there's the term political correctness, and people say, oh, that's political correctness, you know, we don't have to stick with political correctness, we can say what we want to say and say, you know, it doesn't matter if it hurts somebody and so forth. That's only political correctness. But this person made a very, very good point, and she said, may I give you the other word for political correctness? And yes, of course. She said it's called politeness. And it really struck home because quite often there's ways of saying things, and one might even be speaking the truth, but one can say it with respect, one can say it with politeness, and one can say it with kindness. And I think this is the essence. And that pardon by the Bishop of Pamiers, yeah, that was a wonderful thing to do. And the point is, one way or the other, we've got to be brought together. And Catharism, or Gnostic Catharism, is, if nothing else, is about togetherness and not being exclusive. And it's a loving philosophy rather than a religion that makes you tread along a certain path and think along certain lines. So today, they probably finished their lunch by now. Probably quite a few of them are drunk, and there's 220 Cathars ashes laying scattered around, and there's still glowing coals, as the bishop said. 773 years ago, the anniversary. As usual, I'll just conclude with a minute or so in silence. Just a minute of awareness, sorting out who we are, where we are, what we want from ourselves, others, wishing love, happiness, respect to other people, me to you, you to me. Okay, we'll commence. Bye for now. Talk again soon. Bye.